That loaf of bread in your hand today, it might have been made with imported wheat, not because American wheat got worse, but because America just doesn't grow enough of it anymore. In 2025, farms across the U.S. have fallen silent. Like graveyards, some are abandoned, others deliberately set on fire, just to stop the bleeding, while American farmers walk away from their fields drowning in debt, crushed by rising costs and running out of options. Millions of American families are paying more every day just to eat the things that used to be dirt cheap. Even worse, we're becoming increasingly dependent on Canada. A country once hit with heavy tariffs is now quietly taking over U.S. grocery shelves with their wheat. If you think food shortages only happen in faraway countries, you might want to look again at your own bread aisle. The collapse has already started, and this time it's coming from our own farms, from abandoned fields to empty shelves. When America lost the ability to feed itself, Americans used to take pride in those golden fields, where every harvest reaffirmed the belief that nothing could stop the amber waves of grain. But that was a story from the past. In 2025, you can drive across the Great Plains and pass mile after mile of idle land, where the silence isn't from storm's aftermath, but from an agricultural collapse. When planting seeds becomes a gamble, many choose simply not to plant at all. According to the U.S. Bankruptcy Court, farm bankruptcies in 2024 surged by 55% compared to 2023. With 216 filings nationwide, it's an unraveling we haven't seen in years, marking a tipping point as small and mid-sized farms collapse under unbearable financial pressure. Selling land and walking away from the fields is no longer a choice, it's survival. USDA reports show America's total net farm income fell by 24% from $159 billion in 2023 to just $121.7 billion in 2024, and that's with decent harvests. Even in a good year, farmers can't break even in states like Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas. Once the backbone of America's grain belt, acres once used to grow wheat are being scaled back or converted to cattle operations simply because livestock offers more stability. Input costs are rising relentlessly, while crop prices stagnate. According to The Guardian, fertilizer, fuel, and seed prices have soared so high that even bumper crops leave farmers in debt. The Wall Street Journal confirms input prices are staying high even as global prices for corn and soybeans plunge. It's a clear sign of a system under stress, where the people growing our food are left with no protection and no profit. No planting means less domestic food supply. Flour, breakfast cereals, even snack foods once abundant are running low. Retail chains like Kroger and Safeway report price increases of 20% to 40%, or have started shrinking package sizes to quietly manage supply shortfalls for a middle-class family. This isn't just a money issue, it's a food security crisis. Spending an extra $30, $40 a month just to feed 2 kids. Breakfast used to sound absurd. Now it's the new reality. Behind every abandoned acre lies a deeper breakdown. Farmers aren't just losing income, they're losing faith in the system and the policies meant to protect them, and in their future. That's a loss you can't measure in dollars. A rural community can fall apart from single bankruptcy, because a farm is never just a business, it's a whole ecosystem. Schools, shops, neighbors, and livelihoods all tied to the soil. This isn't a natural disaster, it's a systemic failure. Skyrocketing costs, delayed or ineffective government support, and global market pressure all coming together with surgical precision. The result, the ones who plant the seeds are the first to go under on their own land. This crisis isn't some distant worry anymore. Urban consumers may feel far removed from it, but we're all connected by the same food chain. When that chain breaks, even a simple click to reorder your usual loaf of bread might come back without a stock. Some families have already turned to imported bread, not because they want to, but because that's all that's left. This isn't about preference anymore. It's about the right to eat in a country that once claimed it would never go hungry. Empty fields are more than a warning. They're a breaking point. If we can't plant, we can't harvest. And if we can't harvest, our food system loses its foundation. If this continues into next year, or the year after, we won't just be losing bread, we'll lose control over our meals, our nutrition, and our national self-reliance. If America can no longer feed itself, then even people living in the heart of our biggest cities will feel the strain, not just in their wallets, but in their routines, their sense of stability. And that right there is the kind of risk no country can afford to ignore. In the decade ahead, Canada, from tariff target to America's breadbasket. Just a few months ago, Canada was still making headlines as a tariff target, another familiar casualty in the 25% import tax campaign launched in the name of national economic security. But then came the twist no one saw coming. As America struggled through a supply crisis, it was Canada quietly and efficiently stocking the shelves of U.S. supermarkets. And what were they sending? The very thing we once tried to hold back: wheat. In the endless wheat fields of Manitoba and Saskatchewan, Canadian farmers are running at full throttle, their busiest season in nearly A decade freight trains packed with grain move nonstop from the prairies to ports in Vancouver and Montreal, ready to cross the southern border. And here's the thing, they're not exporting, because they have too much they're exporting, because America needs every single sack, because right when the U.S. started issuing tariffs, American farmers were walking off the land. A lack of fertilizer, labor shortages, no support for rising costs, plus skyrocketing diesel and operations bills led to a steep decline in U.S. wheat production, according to the USDA spring wheat acreage. In 2025 dropped to just 9.4 million acres, the lowest since 1970. Worst major producers like North Dakota, Kansas, and Montana all reported double-digit drops in output. Meanwhile, Canada not only held steady, they adapted. Instead of depending on just a few international buyers, they began signing long-term contracts directly with American food manufacturers, ensuring steady high quality supply. The result, bakeries, pasta companies, even fast food chains are now using flour made from Canadian wheat. Grown in the very country we once taxed. The trade world is calling it the Canada paradox, hit with tariffs, yet thriving in the U.S. market, not through price cuts, but by becoming the last viable option for a supply-starved industry. Most American consumers don't know it, but the loaf of bread they picked up this morning might have started as wheat in Manitoba Mill in Minnesota and bagged in their local store. The switch happened so quietly that nobody noticed, but it marks a deeper shift of growing irreversible dependence, because when a nation loses agricultural self-reliance, the next step isn't just imports, it's the surrender of supply chain control. Canada doesn't need to argue, protest, or lobby. They just plant, harvest, and ship, and the U.S. market, it simply folds. And what about the American people? They're not getting discounts, just a new country name on the label. Meanwhile, U.S. farmers, once the pride of rural America, are watching their fields gow, their tractors rust, and their debts pile up with no buyers in sight. With every trainload of Canadian wheat rolling across the northern border, one truth becomes clearer: the tidal breadbasket of the world is shifting while America debates tariffs, policies, and global influence. Canada is simply growing wheat and doing it well. Bread is still on the shelf, but it no longer symbolizes independence. And if we're relying on Canadian wheat just to get through breakfast, maybe it's time to ask who's really feeding America now. And when we finally lose faith in our ability to feed ourselves, what will we have left when a working class gets pushed out of their own breakfast? There was a time when working Americans never gave a second thought to that morning slice of toast or a bowl of cereal before heading out, but now they're counting every dollar. Prices on bread, cereal, and other wheat-based staples have jumped 30 to 50%, according to a chain store age survey. Families making under $50,000 a year in suburbs like Houston, Phoenix, and Detroit report skipping breakfast at least once a week, not by choice, but because the money simply isn't there, according to Feeding America. And this isn't just about going hungry, it's about the ripple effect on health and productivity. Without proper morning fuel, more workers are losing focus and workplaces are seeing the hit in efficiency. It's not just individuals struggling. Small cafes, vegan bakeries, sandwich shops, the kind that serve construction crews, students, and everyday workers are caught between two painful options: raise prices or cut portions. According to the National Restaurant Association, nearly 38% of independent restaurants have had to either increase prices or shrink meal sizes to offset the cost of ingredients. A simple sandwich now costs anywhere from 50 cents to $2 more. A small jump that's enough to make a low-wage worker hesitate before ordering. And when demand for nutritious food falls, the damage spreads. School cafeterias, hospital kitchens, factory lunchrooms all start turning to cheaper, low fiber, high additive food products that do nothing for long-term health. Rand Corporation found that the average worker may lose 3 to 5% of productivity each month due to poor nutrition, hurting not just individual businesses but entire local economies that rely on consistent output and healthy staff. The fallout doesn't stop at job performance. Community clinics in places like Texas and Florida report a rise of 8-11% in afternoon ER visits. Cases of dehydration, blood pressure spikes, and digestive issues is directly linked to poor diets when working families are forced to choose between eating enough and paying the bills. The social structure starts to wobble. Kids show up to school with empty stomachs. Adults show up to work fighting through preventable conditions. Freelancers, construction workers, delivery drivers, and temp workers, the ones who rely most on cheap filling meals, are under intense pressure. Every morning they do the math. The $10 I plan for breakfast could mean 2 more gallons of gas when wages stay flat while everything else gets pricier. Choices disappear behind a wall of invisible pressure. Even the weekly grocery trip feels different now. Buying made in America Used to be a source of pride, now shoppers pick imported goods, not out of preference, but because at least they're available, and at a price I can still afford. The frustration runs deep, not because people don't have the money, but because they've lost the trust. Why didn't the system protect American-made food, so I wouldn't have to buy expensive Canadian goods? Instead, for many in the working class, this is more than inflation, it's a blow to national identity, right there on the dinner table as demand. Slows small-town bakeries, cafes, and grocery stores face impossible odds, raise prices and lose customers, keep prices low, and go under. One shop owner in Dayton, Ohio, said they can't survive without raising prices, but doing so just drives loyal customers away. And when those small businesses shut down, it's not just a loss of income, it's the loss of accessible food, of community space, of everyday convenience. And it's not just breakfast on the chopping block. Children, seniors, and people with chronic conditions, the most vulnerable among us, are now forced to chase after low-cost, low-nutrition food just to get by. According to the NIH, kids who skip breakfast at least 10 days a month see an 8% drop in academic performance, with a 5% higher risk of dropping out altogether. This isn't just a household problem. It's a ticking time bomb for an entire generation that may grow up nutritionally out of balance, with long-term consequences for our society when the working class loses access to basic meals. The whole economy starts to tremble. Lower productivity, higher healthcare costs, and a dangerous dependency on unstable imports. This isn't a sudden crash, it's a slow-motion collapse, quiet but brutal. It's what happens when people lose the right to feed themselves, to eat safely in the country they call home. And in that moment, no big plan or grand policy matters if the most fundamental right to eat and survive is stripped away, and the working class no longer feels secure at the table. The collapse of a symbol when farming no longer feels like pride. For generations, Americans took pride in the amber waves of grain, those golden fields stretching endlessly across the land, a symbol of abundance and promise. That image feels more like a memory today. What once were iconic farmsteads sit eerily silent. Some lie abandoned, others barely holding on. This isn't just rural decay, it's a national alarm bell, shaking the very core of American identity. So how did our pride become a burden? It began with outdated farm policies, left largely untouched for decades, failing to adapt to a fast-changing market and climate. Fertilizer, seed, and fuel costs have skyrocketed, while federal subsidies under the Farm Bill arrive late and just too slowly. According to data from the St. Louis Fed, farm profits are projected to fall another 15% in 2025, marking the steepest decline since 2016. Once staying on the land meant tradition, independence, and generational strength. Now, growing wheat, corn, or soybeans barely covers the cost. Most small farms survive not through market profits, but through subsidies. And when grain prices collapse under global competition, especially from Canada, those subsidies aren't enough. Families are left with two choices: sell out to larger operations or walk away. As of 2024, the U.S. is down to just 1.88 million farms, its lowest count in over a century. And when small family farms disappear, so does a piece of America's soul. Meanwhile, the nation's growing dependence on foreign food, especially from Canada, has quietly undercut what was once our strength. USDA data shows that U.S. agricultural imports have risen 6% annually since 2014. Hitting a record $209.5 billion in 2025, while exports have plateaued. The U.S., once a proud breadbasket to the world, is now importing wheat, not because of natural disaster or war, but because our farmers simply aren't planting anymore. Urban dwellers may not see the dying fields, but they feel it in their grocery bills. The pasta at dinner, the sweet roll with afternoon coffee, many are now made with imported ingredients. This quiet shift chips away at something deeper: the right to believe in your own country's ability to feed itself. One of the starkest symbols of the shift lies in the lower Midwest. Once a picturesque scene of windmills, red barns, and endless grain rows. Nebraska and Kansas now resemble abandoned film sets, dusty machinery, rusted poles, barren soil. Just months after seeding season, a June 19th Reuters report confirmed that wheat abandonment in these states is at its highest since 2020, and despite forecasts for a decent crop, it's more than just crop loss, it's trust loss. When even the wheat, the staple that built this country, can't count on its own land, how can people still believe in resilience? What fills that void is fear. Imported rice that may not be clean, meat that's too expensive, bread made from foreign flour. When those who grow our food are being squeezed out, when farmers lose land, their trade, and their dignity, we don't just lose production, we lose the cultural foundation that says land is our strength. Without adequate subsidies, with no profitable markets, many Farmers are walking away, and more will follow. The pride that once filled every kitchen table is now being replaced by quiet regret and growing anxiety. Even the $10 billion federal aid package from Congress barely scratches the surface. Emergency relief, without structural reform, feels more like a temporary pitch than a lifeline. Farmers aren't investing in next season. They're selling land, taking other jobs, leaving the life they once called legacy. And when headlines focus only on bailout numbers, without mentioning fall planting, farmers feel like a punchline, trading dignity for survival, not growth. Pride isn't just a feeling, it's about feeding your nation, honoring your roots, and connecting generations through the land. When outdated policies clash with changing soil, shifting weather, and chaotic trade policies like the 2025 tariffs, it's no longer a political debate, it's a death nail for American agricultural identity. Losing one farm isn't the tragedy, losing millions of acres and millions of farmers is losing the very energy that once drove this country forward. When farming is no longer a source of national pride, food security crumbles. And when people no longer believe in America, the beautiful, it's not because the country stopped being beautiful, but because the doubt now sits in every kitchen, behind every loaf of bread, whispering, where did this come from, and why couldn't it come from here? America lost control. Canada listened, and won. Put the U.S. and Canada side by side in today's global agricultural battleground, and a painful irony emerged as both countries faced the same market pressures. But while America spiraled into disarray, Canada found stability by doing something deceptively simple: listening to its farmers. America, in 2025, is watching its wheat fields shrink to levels not seen in decades. Spring wheat acreage has fallen to just 9.4 million acres, the lowest since 1970. Winter wheat is down 2%, totaling only 34.1 million acres, according to the USDA. This isn't a seasonal fluctuation. It's a sign of mass retreat. American farmers are switching to more profitable crops like corn and soy, or abandoning farming altogether. Millions of acres are now lying idle. Meanwhile, Canadian farmers are expanding wheat acreage and building more resilient supply chains. A Reuters report highlights a strategic shift facing tariffs on corn and innovation in seed genetics. Canadian farmers pivoted from canola to spring wheat, turning Canada into a fierce global competitor. More importantly, the Canadian government stepped in with over 6.5 billion Canadian dollars in direct support, 1 billion of which was reserved specifically for agri-food. In the U.S., assistance often arrives too late, too little, or too tangled in red tape to save farms on the brink. On the labor front, Canada moved quickly to adjust its H-2A seasonal worker policies, helping farmers fill labor gaps left by American tariffs and bureaucratic delays. In contrast, U.S. farmers are drowning in labor shortages and skyrocketing wage costs. Crops go unharvested, fields go, and food prices keep rising. When it comes to exports, Canada didn't just lean harder on the U.S. market. They diversified. They invested in ports, reopened food processing plants, and upgraded rail networks to reach buyers in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. The U.S., meanwhile, remains bogged down in port delays and fragmented logistics, missing shipment windows and losing customers to Canada. But the starkest difference lies in how each country values agriculture. Canada treats its farmers as part of its national identity, with supply management systems in place for milk, eggs, and poultry. Farmers earn stable incomes and aren't forced to slash prices to survive. Canada uses coordinated national planning to protect farm longevity and land stewardship. The U.S., by contrast, lacks these safety nets, leaving small farmers exposed to every market shock and weather whim. And then comes the ultimate paradox. America's tariff war against Canada was designed to protect domestic agriculture, but it ended up hurting the very people it was supposed to help. As one analyst bluntly put it, the U.S. taxed Canada to punish them, but the ones left behind were American farmers and consumers. While America's small farms collapse, its shoppers are now paying more for imported products, and the cultural legacy of American agriculture, once the pride of family dinner tables, is slowly being overwritten, not with intent, but out of necessity. Even the USDA's prediction of a 2% rebound in winter wheat production for 2025 won't be enough. Why? Because storage, transport, and processing infrastructure in the U.S. hasn't kept up. Meanwhile, Canada continues to expand not just its fields, but its shipping capacity, export access, and value-added production. That's the kind of long-term strategy that builds resilience, not just numbers for everyday Americans. This is more than a story of higher prices. It's about a loss of choice, a loss of control when you buy a loaf of bread. Today, you're likely paying into Canada's system, whether you want to or Not because the domestic option simply isn't there anymore. The ability to choose American grown is fading, and with it goes a core part of our national food sovereignty. The cruel irony, the very tariffs meant to fix American agriculture ended up accelerating its decline. Farmers went bankrupt, consumers paid more, the market grew scarcer. This isn't just a policy misstep, it's proof of a system that no longer fits the modern world. Without a new approach, rethinking everything from farmer support to supply chain infrastructure, the U.S. risks becoming something it never imagined: a nation dependent on the very competitor it tried to weaken. What happens when a nation no longer controls its own food supply? What used to feel like a distant concern is now America's new reality. The United States is losing control over its own food supply. Wheat imports are rising again. The USDA projects that the U.S. will import around 150 million bushels of wheat in the 2024-25 season, up 8% from a year before. But this isn't just a number. Think about it. The next time you open a bag of flour, you may be holding wheat grown in Canada or Australia, not from a farm down the road. Most Americans don't realize that domestic production is drying up, and when something as essential as wheat, once a proud symbol of American self-reliance, gets replaced by imports, our food security isn't just at risk, it's already compromised. Now imagine if Canada, for any reason, drought, disease, politics, suddenly cut exports. The U.S. wouldn't have the ability to make up for that loss. America's spring wheat acreage is down to just 9.4 million acres, the lowest level since 1970. That number is more than a statistic. It's a warning flare. The danger isn't just empty shelves, it's deeper. It's about losing the power to control your own food. Every major power in history has prioritized food independence. If one crossbird drought hits, prices for basic flour could double overnight, and America wouldn't be able to respond in time. Farmers don't have enough land, businesses don't have enough capital, ports don't have enough capacity to handle sudden surges in imports. This is the exact fear that past agricultural nations have warned about. Food insecurity is no longer a developing world issue. It's knocking on the door of America's middle class. When imports are no longer a choice, but necessity, that's when a nation stops functioning like a nation. When importing wheat becomes the only realistic option, the U.S. edges dangerously close to a breaking point. Bringing in 150 million bushels a year is not just about numbers, it's a shot straight through the heart of national security. And if Canada has a bad harvest or shifts policy, that pipeline breaks overnight. That means flour shortages, higher bread prices, smaller menus, and restaurants that rely on domestic grain budget foods disappearing from the tables of working families. The bigger picture is even more troubling. If the U.S. keeps losing farmland to real estate development, solar farms, or just plain abandonment, domestic production won't just stall, it will shrink dramatically. Climate AI warns that by 2025 drought and heat could cut yields of wheat, oats, and barley by as much as 7 to 10%. And when America goes looking for extra imports to fill the gap, it may not have the infrastructure, partners, or capital to do so. Canada is ahead on all three fronts. Losing control over your food supply means losing control over the dinner table. You can't set prices, you can't shield yourself from global market swings. You don't have a backup plan when foreign suppliers falter. That's not just an economic failure, it's a national one. Food security isn't just about GDP, it's about survival. Because the day Americans stop believing that their country can feed itself is the day America becomes just a word, stripped of the power, the pride, and the promise it once stood for. A nation once hailed as the breadbasket of the world is now relying on foreign wheat just to keep its shelves stocked. What was once a symbol of pride, American agriculture, has become a cautionary tale of complacency and short-sighted policies. And that raises the question, if we've already lost the ability to feed ourselves, what might we lose next? You still feel secure when your grocery cart gets smaller, but your receipt keeps growing. And do you believe that the decisions being made in Washington, decisions that may never mention your name, aren't shaping your family's meals more than you think? This video does not promote division or encourage any form of secession. All of the content presented here is meant to explore, analyze, and spark meaningful conversation based on real events, emotional truths, and current social trends. We fully respect the U.S. Constitution and all federal laws. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next episode where we dive into the stories the mainstream media often leaves out. Our analysis is based on current data. In an independent perspective, it is not intended to predict the future with certainty or mislead in any way. Our hope is that the information shared here inspires awareness, reflection, and timely action before the next thing we lose is too late to get back.